Hello, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz, President of the City University Graduate Center. Welcome to Women, a series of programs for and about us. One of the key issues concerning women worldwide is that our reproductive rights, the freedom to get information and education we need to make informed choices on whether or not to have or add to our families, with or without government help or interference. So today we turn to Gloria Feldt, President of Planned Parenthood of America, an organization which has been in the forefront of educating and guiding women and their families through its clinics and workshops. Gloria's most recent book, The War on Choice, The Right-Wing Attack on Women's Rights and How to Fight Back, has recently been published in paperback by Bantam, and it couldn't be released at a more momentous and urgent time for us. Welcome. It's very good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm delighted.
You grew up in Texas.
I did.
In the same region where our President Bush grew up?
Yes, indeed. I grew up in the buckle of the Texas Bible Belt. I spent my formative years, as did George W. Bush, in West Texas. I have sort of metaphorically said I think we must have been raised on the opposite sides of the oil patch because we certainly emerged with a very different set of values, particularly about women and women's place in this world.
And you went to school in Texas?
Yes, I did. I lived my life a little bit backwards from the normal pattern of women today. This was the 1950s in rural West Texas, and women were not expected to go to school, to go to college, to achieve that much in life. I had 3 children by the time I was 20, and then I woke up and I began to start my college training, and it took me about 12 years to finish.
Where did you go to school?
I started at Odessa College, a community college in Odessa, Texas, where I was living. And I finished at the University of Texas when it opened a branch in West Texas. It was my salvation.
And how did you come to Planned Parenthood?
Well, it was a little bit of a circuitous route, but I think it was fate, primarily, that led me to Planned Parenthood. I had been teaching at Head Start, and it was in the early days of the war on poverty. Family planning programs were being started simultaneously with Head Start and other war on poverty programs. The priest in the Catholic Church, where my Head Start class was held, actually told me about Planned Parenthood. This surprises many people. I don't know that it would happen today, and I had no idea how dramatically radical this priest apparently was. But his view was, the people in my parish are poor. I can't tell them they have to have a child every year because I can't feed them, I can't clothe them. How can I expect that of them? And he actually told me about Planned Parenthood, and I began to understand how being able to plan and space your childbearing enables a family to pull itself up.
Well, it's interesting because in this really quite remarkable book, you note that actually abortion and conception were legal and accepted in this country in the 1700s, in the 1800s, that when we think of abortion and reproductive rights, we think of the Puritans as being so strict. But in fact, on this issue, they were very liberal.
Well, in fact, the records indicate that about a third of their marriages were ones in which the woman was already pregnant when she got married. So this is something that doesn't change too much with human history. Human beings are always looking for ways to be able to plan and space their childbearing. And that's why since the beginning of time, there has been birth control, as rudimentary as it might have been, and in every society. People have tried to limit the number of children they have, sometimes for health reasons, sometimes for economic reasons, and sometimes just because they want to be able to give time to the children that they have.
Why did the dynamics change so that by 1900 this more liberal attitude was no longer dominant?
Well, I think that in the early part of our country, these issues were just not even dealt with at all. They were sort of women's issues, and as such didn't rise to the level of importance in the body politic. What began to happen in the late 1800s is that the medical profession began to be professionalized, as it were, and doctors were male, were actually all male at that time, and they wanted to wrest control of all medical care from any other medical providers. And it was primarily women to women, or midwives who were teaching other women about contraception and performing abortions.
But, you know, in the answer, I think, of people who are so opposed to abortion would be, well, what if you care about family planning, why not abstinence?
Yes, and I think that sometimes what the right-wing abstinence movement doesn't seem to understand is that again, sexuality is a part of our very being as humans. You could lock a child away in a closet, and he or she would still discover sexuality. This is something that we have to learn to understand, to appreciate, and to deal with. And understanding how to say no is one part of it. But almost every human being is going to eventually say yes. And when you say yes, you need to understand what the consequences of that are and how to protect yourself from unintended pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections. You know, there are those who believe that we as human beings have the ability to make those kinds of judgments, and there are those, for example, the fundamentalist right wing, who believe that we don't, and they still see a very hierarchical world in which women should be kept barefoot and pregnant.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things in your book that I didn't even realize is how recent this barefoot and pregnant concept is.
Yes, I mean, Senator Van Dalsem and his...
It goes back to 1963 in a speech he gave to the Rotary Club, and I quote, "When one of our women starts poking around in something she doesn't know anything about, we give her an extra milk cow. If that don't work, we give her a little more garden to tend to, and then if that's not enough, we get her pregnant and keep her barefoot." This is 1963.
Indeed, that's exactly right, and people are often asking me what is behind this attempt to roll back reproductive rights, and I think you have to ultimately, when you peel back the onion, see that it is about women and whether women are going to have an equal place at life's table, whether we value children enough to want to make sure that we have them when we can really take care of them, and whether everybody's liberties are going to be protected. But that issue of women's role in society, whether women have an equal place at life's table, is just core and fundamental.
What is exactly does choice mean in reproductive rights?
Choice means exactly what it would mean if you open the dictionary. It would mean, what are your options? What is your array of options? And for us at Planned Parenthood, because we are the largest provider of reproductive health care and education services in the country, serving about 5 million people a year through our 900 health centers in every single state, what it means is, first and foremost, enabling people to have the means to prevent unintended pregnancy, and choice there means what birth control method would you like to use, and what's right for you and your health situation and your life. And then if a woman has an unintended pregnancy, choice means, well, if you are pregnant and you had not intended to be, what are your options there? Your options are to carry the pregnancy to term and either parent or relinquish for adoption, or to terminate the pregnancy and have an abortion.
Those people who are opposed to abortion say, well, you know, since there is the choice to put the child up for adoption, if you ban abortion, then there is still choice.
Well, since the beginning of time, abortion has been used as a means of not carrying a pregnancy to term when a woman feels that she can't. You know, I think what the so-called right to life, that I prefer to call anti-choice groups, don't seem to understand is that throughout time and history, if a woman doesn't feel she can bring a child into this world properly, she's not going to do it. And what will happen is women will die. So much for their right to life. They're only about the fertilized egg. They're not about the well-being of the child once it's born, and they're certainly not about the well-being of the woman. The fact is that a woman has to have the integrity of her own body. And it's really, to me anyway, a fundamental human right to be able to decide for ourselves whether and when we have children. And I wish that we didn't have to deal with this situation where there are values in conflict, but there are. And ultimately it has to be the woman then who decides what she does. And should a woman have to just inherently agree to submit her body as an incubator because some other people in our society say you must carry this child to term? I don't think so. I don't think that's just.
One of the things that you point out in this book and really make very clear is that the issue of choice, when we think about choice in terms of the media attention, it is all on abortion or not abortion.
Right.
But that choice really is a much broader concept, and that the war on choice is not just anti-abortion. What's the basis of that?
Abortion is actually just the tip of the ideological iceberg of the anti-choice right. They use the abortion issue as a wedge in politics because it's an issue with which they can whip up their constituents and use that energy for whatever their other purposes are. But I think, again, beyond that, it really is about what you believe about whether women should have an equal place in the world. And for those of us who think that the changes in our modern society have been good ones, that it's a good thing that young women today grow up believing they have a perfect right to be whatever they want to be, to get the education they want to get, to have a job that they might aspire to, and to become mothers as well. I think that's a great thing. And I think that it has also changed men in this world, because certainly my son and my son-in-law have been much more engaged in parenting and child rearing than was the case when I was bringing up my children. So it's a code actually for a much larger social agenda. And the divide between those of us who want women to continue to develop and have an equal place in the world and those who would really like to go back to the days of barefoot and pregnant is a very wide one.
But the social agenda, in addition to abortion, is to limit or eliminate all contraceptive options, all family planning options?
Well, this is the part that is so astonishing to people, and but you have only to look at, for example, what the Bush administration has done in the last 4 years to see. And I wrote the War on Choice in part to connect the dots among the different ways that reproductive rights are being attacked. And yes, indeed, family planning programs domestically and internationally are being defunded, or they are being changed to programs that are really abstinence-only programs. In President Bush's first budget, he took contraceptive coverage out of federal employees' insurance plans. Congress put it back in, but just recently, his administration has gone through the back door and created another health plan that has no contraception, no sterilization, no abortion, not even artificial insemination.
And this health plan is in place now?
It is in place.
It's an option.
It is an option. It is not a requirement. So it's, if they can't do it through the front door, they'll do it through the back door.
Well, some
let me
people
give
say,
you some other examples.
All right, if there is choice, let's have all the options.
I think that's a valid argument, as long as we can make sure that everyone does have the option of having an insurance plan that does cover contraception, which is used by 95% of American women. It's one of the most normal, basic aspects of women's health care. And I think it's easy for us in the 21st century to forget that at the beginning of the 20th century, women's average lifespan was about 40 years because of too many pregnancies too close together and unsafe abortion. We don't want to go, we don't want that to happen again. And that's why it's important to protect access to all of these services.
One of the things that comes through so clearly in your cataloging this very extensive agenda that goes way beyond abortion is the pressure, for instance, on the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, to put on their website only information about condoms in terms of how often they fail.
Right.
And not the demonstrated role of their protective role in terms of disease as well as contraception.
Well, I'm glad that you brought that one up, because I'm going to talk about that in the context of not only what's happening, but also the how to fight back part, which is my favorite part of this book. Because I don't think we are victims of fate. I think we really can make a difference and change this direction that the country is going in right now. Yes, indeed. Shortly after President Bush took office, the administration began to pressure the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to remove medically accurate information about condoms and replace it with abstinence-only information, which didn't even have anything about condoms except negativity. There was a great deal of public outcry, and this is the point I want to make. Once this became known, there was an immense public outcry, both grassroots and also from the medical profession. And as a consequence of that, the CDC replaced the abstinence-only message with some more medically accurate information about condoms. It still begins with the abstinence message, but then it continues on with some accurate information about condoms and how they can prevent the spread of sexually transmitted infections. So my point in telling this story is to say that the only way we can change this attack on reproductive health and rights is to become activist. We may have thought that these issues were all resolved, but they aren't.
Was that the same dynamic that was involved with the National Cancer Institute, where the National Cancer Institute was pressured into posting information that abortions were linked later to breast cancer, for which there is absolutely no evidence?
That's correct. No medical evidence whatsoever. In fact, the evidence is that there is no link. And that is exactly the same dynamic that occurred. There was pressure on the NIH, the National Cancer Institute, which is part of the NIH, and then there was counter pressure. We can apply that counter pressure, and we can make sure that that misinformation does not get put on those public health websites. And I'm very pleased to say that, these assaults come in many different forms. And one of our affiliates, our San Diego Planned Parenthood affiliate, has just recently won a lawsuit at the Supreme Court level, where they had been sued in order to try to force them to put that misinformation on their website. And they fought it in court, and they fought it all the way through the courts, and the United States Supreme Court has just said, no, you're right. You should not have to put misinformation about public health on your website. It's astonishing that we have to fight these battles in this day and age, but we do.
This takes a lot of money.
Yes, it does. It takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of energy. And I think it ultimately comes back to what Margaret Sanger knew in the early days of the birth control movement, which is that you have to put your convictions into action and not just accept what's going on around you. If you see an injustice, you have to fight it, and we have to organize ourselves to do that.
One of the things you point out in this book is the use of language. And how, for instance, late-term abortions, which are done very rarely, usually because of dire medical circumstances, and has the technical name of extraction and dilation and extraction, was named partial birth abortion, which has no medical meaning.
Right.
This manipulation of the language, which then leads to the criminalizing medical procedures.
Right.
How does one fight that?
Very aggressively. And I think that was a good example, and almost a textbook example. It should probably be used in linguistic classes and in communications classes as a really classic example of Orwellian language that got into the public lexicon, our general lexicon, before people really understood what it was. And once we began to understand what they were really trying to do, well, it became clear as we talked to doctors that actually this abortion ban, which has now been signed into law and is the first time our federal government has ever criminalized abortion techniques, what they've actually done is not about late term. What they've actually done is to criminalize a wide range of techniques that doctors use as early as the 12th week of pregnancy, where they feel that those techniques are the right one to protect the health of their patient, the health of the woman, and her future fertility. And once that became evident, it became much easier for us to fight that in court. But unfortunately, the language is already in existence, and we're constantly in a position of having to try to correct all of those misperceptions about what they are. And by the way, can I just add, I think what we have to do is have a much more aggressive, much more proactive agenda. And I call it the fighting forward agenda. It's way too late to fight back. We have to take it into our own hands and fight forward. We have to have our own legislative agenda and make them fight on our territory where we are the strongest.
What is that legislative agenda?
For example, contraceptive equity. We've been able to pass it in 22 states, and we have the votes in Congress to pass it, except that the current anti-choice leadership in Congress will not let it come up for a vote. That would require any insurance plan that covers prescription drugs to cover contraceptives. Mm-hmm. And by that, it simply would make contraceptives much more accessible. It would prevent women from having to choose between, do I spend my $30 this month on my pills, or do I pay my bills and feed my children? I mean, it's a patent unfairness that so many health plans don't cover contraception. It also, I think, is going to require us to codify the basic principles of reproductive rights. We're going to have to do that state by state by state. We've done it in about 6 or 7 states already, and we're going to have to be able to do it all the way up to the federal level. That's a much harder and longer term battle, but that's what we have to do.
But in the meantime, Gloria, you point out the large number of judicial appointments that are being made at the lower court level, which don't garner a great deal of attention compared to the federal circuits, and in one of these where you quote the Dahlstrom, you note that a man named James Leon Holmes, who was nominated to the federal district court in Arkansas by the president, said the wife is to subordinate herself to her husband.
Yes.
Now, if the lower level federal courts are filled with judges who have these kinds of beliefs, even if you fight forward, aren't you going to lose at the court level?
That's why we have to fight forward at the grassroots level, because ultimately the people trump even the courts. When the people are passing laws at the state and federal level, ultimately that will trump even the courts, and eventually, as happened with the civil rights movement, eventually even the courts will move in our direction. I believe that. People usually think, and I used to think, that the courts created the law, but actually in many instances the courts follow where public opinion already is in terms of supporting laws. And that's why I think we have to fight forward to pass those laws at the state level.
But the counterforces, stop Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
Which is not stop abortion, it means stop all family planning.
That's right.
Are very strong.
They are. They're strong in the sense that they're activist, and they are they are fired with the zeal of their own belief system. And you know, I don't think you can fault people for working in the democratic process. I think what that means is we have to learn from our adversaries, and we have to fight even harder and use the democratic process ourselves. The good news is there are actually more of us than there are of them, and we can make it happen, but we have to really participate in the process, and it's not easy. It takes a lot of effort, but we can do it.
But you know, poll after poll shows that the majority of Americans feel women should have a choice about abortion. And yet, when you come to legislation at the national level, it always goes against that. How do you explain the power of the people, the grassroots, that have one point of view, and legislation that is so anti that point of view?
It's that this pro-choice majority has not yet asserted its majority in that sense. We have to actually get more involved in the process. I'm very excited, for example, about what I see in terms of people's interest in the elections this year, and particularly young people's and young women's interest in the elections this year. I think that's what has to happen. And you know, maybe you should run for office. I mean, seriously, I mean, we all have to think about what part should we play in the body politic, because those people, those organizations like STOP, they don't have to use any of their resources to provide real services to people.
Well, Gloria, we can continue to talk about this for a long time. This is really a very enlightening book, but I'm sorry, we're out of time. My thanks to Gloria Feldt, President of Planned Parenthood of America, for joining us. The War on Choice, The Right-Wing Attack on Women's Rights and How to Fight Back, has just been published by Bantam. For the City University Graduate Center and Women to Women, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz.